We are ready. Thank you again for joining for our talk today. Today we will have a discussion which is called on URBICIDE again. It is one of the talk from the talk series about reconstruction and rebuilding the communities and cities after URBICIDE in Ukraine. And now, speaking about our plan for today, we will have some presentation from our speakers. They are Francesco Mazzucchelli and Kostantyn Mezentsev, and then our speakers will have some dialogue and also the following part with questions. We've got some questions from you in the registration form. Some of them we will talk about, and also if you want, you can ask some questions by person today after the presentation ends. And now I invite Oksana Barshynova to invite our guest.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. Hello, dear guests. Hello, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to our first event in the series of online discussions dedicated to the reconstruction of cities and communities after URBICIDE. I would like to remind you once again that this series of conversation about the URBICIDE is part of our large project conceived together with the Center for Urban Studies in the first months after the full-scale invasion, and started in the summer with conversations with Ukrainian intellectuals. In the context of reflections on how Ukraine is changing, how we are changing, how our attitude to the past, heritage, environment is changing, how we are rethinking our values and plans. In this context, the conversation about URBICIDE is extremely relevant. After the destruction of Mariupol and the ruination that Kharkiv and Zaporizhia are experiencing today, we understand that the demolition of the city is one of the manifestations of genocide. After all, the destruction of the city can be understood as the destroying of a person, his or her world, her or his relationships, all the diversity that determines and shapes human life, gives him or her a sense of security, reliability, and finally, happiness. It is very difficult to talk about the future of our cities and communities after the war without analyzing the problems of URBICIDE, ways and possibilities of reconstruction after it. On behalf of the National Art Museum of Ukraine, I would like to thank the participants of the first conversation, renowned researchers Francesco Mazzucchelli and Kostantyn Mezentsev, for supporting this significant project and for participating in the crucial discussion today. I wish you productive conversation and a lively discussion.
Thank you, Oksana. And now I will be kind of chairing the event. I won't take much of your time. I'm Svitlana Shlipchenko, and I represent the Center for Urban Studies, actually one of the partners who initiated the series together with the National Art Museum of Ukraine, Bologna University, and Université Libre de Bruxelles, Goran Yaniv. I can't see him here, but I very much hope he will join us. He put much effort to make it happen today. And well, I'm just going ahead and introduce our speakers. Francesco will do, I think, a kind of general, give us the general idea and introduce the topic of URBICIDE to us. And Kostantyn, then he will bring Ukrainian context, more Ukrainian context into it. And I think then they will perhaps will put questions to each other for a short while, and then they will be answering your questions. You can put your questions in chat, and then we will pick up the most interesting, perhaps the most pressing things. So now Francesco Mazzucchelli, he's professor of semiotics at the University of Bologna at the Department of Philosophy and Communication Studies, and he will introduce us into the topic of urbicide.
Thank you very much, Svitlana. Thank you, Oksana, Mariana, and everybody for organizing this important series of talks. I'm going to share the screen. So if you can confirm that you can see the screen, okay, thank you. Yes, the title of this first dialogue that we will be having today with me and Kostantyn, it says it all in a way. You know, we are forced again of sorry, to talk about the relation between war and the city. Again, we are not happy about this, but somehow with Svitlana, Goran, and the other that participated in the organization of this initiative, we felt the urge to meet and to build a kind of bridge within Europe, within the academic community, to meet, to discuss about these problems together. We felt this kind of urge actually to do that. So I'm really happy and that we can do this together today. As Svitlana said already today, what I'm going to do is to try to do a short introduction to the topic, a topic that is, as you can imagine, huge. My aim is just to start to put on the table some issues that will be covered also in the next the talk of Kostantyn, but also in the next events of this series. And will be discussed through the other events of this series. So the aim is just to present some points to reflect on and to pose some questions, probably to orientate the debate. And also I appreciate and I want to thank the audience, because I had a quick look. I just received the file with your questions, and I think that are really interesting. And so I'm really looking forward to discuss this topic at the end with all of you together, let's say. So I would like to start. This will be my only example about Ukraine, because of course I'm happy that Kostantyn is here to get into the Ukrainian case better than me. I don't know by firsthand. This is just an example, because it helps me to introduce a topic that I'd like to discuss with you. This is, you know, the Russian strike of the TV tower on the 1st of March by the Russian army. And as you know, the strike on the TV tower produced also a collateral, let's say, a collateral damage, which was the Babi Yar memorial site damage. Let's say. It wasn't destroyed at the end. Also, many civilians were killed in this action. But the target wasn't, the explicit target was the TV tower, but it was also hit the Babi Yar complex. Babi Yar complex is the memorial site that is a complex topography of memory, in which different, a landscape that already bring the traces of tragic past events, that already brings some narratives of memory. There are some memorials, a monument to the Soviet soldier unveiled in the 71, a memorial, a more recent memorial to the killed Jews of 91. There is in the website of forensic architecture. If you don't know this project, I suggest you to Google forensic architecture. It's a very interesting project coordinated by Eyal Weizman, professor in I don't remember the university right now, but I think it's London University, not UCL. Anyway, a researcher working on the team on the forensic architecture project started researching this case, this episode of the Russian strike on the Kyiv Tower, TV tower, and this research demonstrates with a topographical analysis of the territory how the bombing doesn't just hit a strategic target that was a TV tower. Let's, if we accept that it is a strategic target and a legitimate target, we can also question this, but also as the consequence to in a way interfere with a more complex topography of memory, to hit and destroy a landscape in which history had already left previously its tragic imprints, being the site, as you know, one of the worst Holocaust massacres against the Jewish population. So the team of forensic architecture analyzes. You can find on the internet, on the website of forensic architecture, the complete analysis of this case study, and they analyze this complex intertwining of different layers of memory in the topography of this site, on which this new tragic event adds more layers. And why I'm starting with this? Because I would like to start from this point. Our landscape, the European landscape, at least, probably the global landscape, but let's just focus on Europe. The European landscape is a landscape of terror, a landscape that is informed by tragic, by violent events, by the totalitarianisms, by political violence. It's what we could call a terrorscapes. This name, I didn't coin this term, terrorscapes. It's a name invented, let's say, by Rob van der Laarse, a Dutch professor who coordinated a project, Terrorscapes, to which I participated some years ago, in which we wanted to map the European maps and topographies of terror to see how this landscape have transformed, have been monumentalized, some memories have been repressed, some memory have been ideologically transformed, and so forth. So somehow we could say that the European landscape has recorded, has registered, has archived. It's a sort of spatial archive of these tragic events. It's like a territorial archive. And cities are the places where traces of war are still incorporated, embodied by the palimpsests of our cities new. I show you just some examples. This is a wall in Munich with bullet holes from Second World War. This is a wall in Berlin. This is a wall in Bologna with the traces of air bombing. The ruin of the St. Nikolai Church in Hamburg, Second World War. Some plaques, some monuments. So it's very common today when visiting a European city to stumble upon war traces and ruins. There is a kind of afterlife of these traces after the war. And I will come back to this problem at the end of the last part of the talk. These traces can be monumentalized, can be left in ruin, can be, we see here in Palermo, can be transformed and incorporated in the urban palimpsests. These are urban ruins from Second World War in Palermo that are today inhabited, that are lived ruins. Same in Cagliari, in San Lorenzo. So why I'm showing you this picture? Because we will come back to this point at the end about the afterlife, let's say, of the traces of war in the cities. Because we have these traces, because European cities are terrorscapes. Because in the 20th century, war enters the city again, enters again into the city. This is a map used by the pilot of aircraft to bomb the city. They used to put this in the cockpit of the aircraft. One could say, I'm just showing you some visual images to show you some pictures. One could say that this has been always true. Cities and war have been always let's say, connected, related. Let's think about the destruction of Carthago, the destruction of Jerusalem in the ancient history. But in the 20th century, something different happens. The relation between the city and war is redefined in a totally different way. Max Weber already noted that with the birth of the industrial city, the city becomes again, the war becomes again a urban fact, something that happens in the city. So a long series of landscapes of ruins, London, Dresden, Bologna, Tokyo. There is this expression post-mortem city that was coined by Chris Gray and then used by another scholar, Stephen Graham, who has studied a lot the problem of urbicide, the nuclear annihilation of Hiroshima, of course, but more recent examples like siege of Sarajevo, Beirut, Aleppo, the Twin Towers, another attack against the city, Grozny, one of the most forgotten urbicides of the more recent year, and then sadly, what's happening right in these days, the bombing of Zaporizhia a couple of days ago, Mariupol, and many other pictures that I could show. So what defines the 20th century is a new warfare, a new way to wage war, in which cities are the main target, the main victim, because the main target and victim is now the civilian population living inside the city. The war becomes again a total social fact, as the sociologist Maus would say, something that we cannot decide to skip war. We are involved in war since there is war, and we are targets because we are in this game, willingly or not. If you think about what war was, how Clausewitz, for example, described war in his books. War was something happening outside the city, in the country. It was something against two professional armies without involving civilian population. In the 20th century, this changes completely. There is a watershed event. There is Guernica. There are many events, but the most symbolic one is the bombing of Guernica by Luftwaffe in the Spanish Civil War. That inaugurated this new strategy of enemy annihilation through the devastation of cities, which later characterized the Second World War, and so on. I made here this weird collage, patchwork of images to show that there is a sort of fil rouge connecting all these different examples of war. Now, starting from this obscure book from the beginning of the 20th century by an Italian, the General Douai, who wrote The Command of Air, in which he was one of probably the first to theorize attacks on urban population to spread terror from the air, using aircraft to provoke terror. Terror is the word used by Douai. And so to a new aggressive war against the defensive war promoted by Clausewitz in the 19th century, 18th century. And what happened, a new aesthetics of war start spreading, futurism. We have here a futurist painting about an airplane going into the city. Guernica, already mentioned, the doctrine of strategic bombings. The more recent doctrines of war, nuclear war, preemptive war. There is this kind of, we could trace this fil rouge, this genealogy connecting Giulio II, Guernica bombed by Luftwaffe. We are at the beginning of 20th century, 1932. The Blitzkrieg, of course, by the Nazi regime. The theorization of the strategic bombing by Royal Air Force. That is not, of course, it's not explicit, this theorization in that period, but it was very used, of course, in Second World War. And then the mutual assured destruction of a nuclear war, in which cities are the main potential victim. And then again, coming to our days, the humanitarian intervention, preemptive wars, the shock and awe doctrine by Bush administration, the drones, the surgical strikes. So after the military power acquires this air command, this dominio dell'aria, Giulio II said, this air command, civilian population could no longer avoid war, becomes the target, the main target of war. And aerial strikes become also an emotional device to spread terror. The problem is that, according to Douai and to all the armies after Douai for all the 20th century, bombing cities is the most effective way to make a regime collapse, because it destroy completely all the resistance, according to them. This is a matter of discussion. We should discuss about this point, because I think that this is something that deserves discussion. It becomes a sort of form of communication. The army communicate through terror, imprinting terror through bombing the city. And so there is a philosopher, Peter Sloterdijk, that he maintains that from the 20th century, a new era begins, he says, in which war no longer targets the enemy's body, but the environment of the bodies of the enemy. So the terror comes from the air. This is the title of the book, Terror from the Air. It talks of an aeroterrorism. So the main target is the necessary condition for life, air, but also cities, also the infrastructures, what allows us to live together. And this leads to another important question. So cities becomes the main target again, main target and victim. So there was Wittgenstein, the philosopher Wittgenstein, used to compare language to cities. He used to ask how many houses and streets do we need to make a city a city? How many streets and houses does it take before a lived environment becomes a city, begins to actually be a city? We can reverse this question. We could ask, how much can I take away? How much can I destroy from a city for the city to continue to exist? Now, all these bombings are operation of systematic and deliberate destruction of elements, of strategic elements, but on the word strategic we should discuss, because strategic means everything. And what happens when we target, when we take away something from the city, the final goal being the complete annihilation of the city? This is a map for the bombing of Bologna in Second World War. This is a map of Hamburg, Royal Air Force, where the targeted zone are the most flammable areas of the city to spread fires in the city. This is interesting, actually. It's a very quickly, I'm going to explain this. This was the bombing of Pantelleria, a small island beneath Sicily in the Mediterranean. They attacked and bombed Pantelleria. The commander-in-chief wasn't happy with the result, because he said that the ruins didn't look very good. They didn't look very, let's say, catchy and sexy in a picture. So he staged a kind of fake bombing of the city, dynamiting and exploding some buildings, so to create a proper ruined landscape. And then these pictures started circulating in propaganda to say, this is what we are going to do to your cities. So again, terror as a form of communication, war and destruction used as a form of propaganda. So this question here, the problem is how much can we take away from the city for the city to be still a city, to be still alive, emerged dramatically during the Yugoslav wars. We all know where the word urbicide came from. Actually, it doesn't come from there, but it became famous during the 90s and during the Yugoslav wars, when a group of architects, especially Bogdan Bogdanovic, a prominent architect in Yugoslavia, he designed some of the most iconic monuments in Yugoslavia, the Flower of Jasenovas, just to mention one. He was a mayor of Belgrade, the mayor of Belgrade, and this question, how much can I destroy a city for the city to still be alive, remain in life, was posed dramatically in that period. And for Bogdanovic, urbicide, he defined urbicide as the ritual murder of the city. This is his phrase, a sentence. The phenomenal destruction of the cities, which we are witnessing now with such horror, is fanned by a fury of indignation at the reserves of memory that the city represents. I don't mean solely the destruction of museum, I mean the extinction of the noble reserves of architecture, forms, and intrinsic message they convey. So in this idea of Bogdanovic of urbicide as a ritual murder, it's very interesting, this ritual aspect. No? It looks like it reminds of another theologian, Joseph Riquert, who talks of ritual of destruction. There are rituals of foundation of the city, but there are also rituals to unmake the city. So how war unmakes the city? And does the war succeed in unmaking the cities? This is a good question, I think. So of course he had in mind these images, Bogdanovic, the destruction of Vukovar, the destruction of the urbicide of Sarajevo, the Mostar, Dubrovnik, Knin, many Zara, many other cities that were bombed and destroyed and attacked in as much as cities, in as much as spaces of coexistence, and as a cultural model of coexistence between diversity. This was the main idea of Bogdanovic. For Bogdanovic, the city became a target because it was the urban culture incorporated by cities in Yugoslavia that was an obstacle to the affirmation of nationalism. A city like Sarajevo that represented a miracle of coexistence between different, I'm showing you some here, a miracle of coexistence between different cultures. That was the main target of the Bosnian nationalistic army, the Serbian Bosnian nationalistic army. So, urbicide, in the eyes of Bogdanovic, is a operation of desemiotization, dememorialization of the city, of subtracting things from the city to make the city be less city than before, somehow. A violent action of political pressure of shared cultures and memory. A semiotics of oblivion, a project of dememorization of urban landscape, to use the word of Delagnese and Squarcina. But what happens actually? These are some interesting maps, and I'm going very quickly because I don't want to talk too much. This is a map design showing the visual areas visible to the snipers on the city. This is another map that was drawn by a collective of artists named Fama during the siege, in which it's a kind of ironic map, of course, but it's also useful for us because it show us the morphology, the geographical, let's say the urban politics of this urbicide, the besieger on the hills and the besieged people on the valley, which defines two different spatial domains, two different spatial cultures also. The rural culture, according to Bogdanovich, the besieging forces on the hill, and the urban culture, that's the main target. And the main targets are the main landmarks and the places of meeting of the city. But what happens in Sarajevo? Our question was, how much can we take away from the city for the city to still be a city? The life in Sarajevo goes on during the siege. Despite of this everyday silent dialogue between the sniper and the citizen, this silent and dramatic and tragic and deathful dialogue, a new geography, war geography of the city was valid and current. You had to accelerate the run in some point at the sniper alley. You could stay in other points that were safe. So another bit different rhythm of the city was current at the moment, but still life went on. So we had this kind of okay, this is a kind of, probably it is a staged, but during the city there was a social life. During the siege there was a social life in the city. There was a theater, a war theater that was in which people used to gather. There is this very funny survival guide. It's a kind of guide written by Fama, these collective artists, for the tourists coming to Sarajevo during the siege, in which they tell you where you can find a coffee or a gin tonic in a city when there is nothing. So these are the irony of the Bosnian people. So this is somehow one of the first questions. So we saw many pictures of urban landscape in ruins, and all the urban landscapes in ruins, they all look the same. All the urbicides also, they look the same. Is the Ukrainian, what is the characteristic of the aggression against Ukraine? What are the characteristics of the urbicide against Ukraine? I think this will be an interesting topic of reflection for our next talks. Here, just a very quick slide in which there is a lot of literature about urbicide. Here I'm just summarizing some of the most well-known position of some of the most well-known authors. There will be time to discuss this. This is not a lecture, so I'm not going through this. If some of you are interested, of course, I can give you references later. Now, it's interesting that this is always noticed, always underlined by anyone. The term urbicide doesn't come from Bogdanovich, but actually from a completely different debate. Ada Louise Huxtable and Marshall Berman in the States, in which urbicide was defined as not as an act of war, but they talked of urbicide in relation to the politics of destruction of memory in the urban planning. So this is interesting, this connection, because there is an urbicide that can come from inside. It's something that I don't have time to discuss now, but maybe it will be interesting for later. And just the last point, and I will be very quick on this, I started discussing about the afterlife of traces of war, the afterlife of this difficult heritage we have in our city. Because there is this kind of paradox. No? In a way, urbicide, if urbicide dememorialize and produce aims to produce oblivion in the city, at the same time it produces a form of memory in the forms of traces, of remains, of ruins, and so on. And reconstruction in the post-urbicide phase, while aims at rememorizing and producing memory, also can produce oblivion about erasing layers of the war, of what happened. I'm talking of, I'm not saying a lot about this, but I'm talking about this. Of course, in the post-URBICIDE reconstruction phase, reconstruction moment, the politics of reconstruction decide how the war event has to be, and if has to be incorporated in the palisades of the city. How the memory of the city should still keep traces or not, or how should narrate and talk about the war. So yeah, we have two examples: San Francesco, the church of San Francesco in Bologna, completely reconstructed, and so the event of the destruction was completely removed. There is nothing saying that there was a moment in which the church was destroyed. And then other examples, these are two opposite poles of a continuum in which we memorialize the ruin, and so we presentify. Of course, these are two poles. There are many, let's say, solutions that are in the middle. I don't have time now to discuss all of these, but I would like to, this is a very interesting example actually, because this is the monumentalization. I'm just saying a couple of words about this. This is a work by Christian Boltanski in Berlin, in which the empty spot left by the bombing of a house is left as a space of absence and memorialized as a missing house, in which the names of the former inhabitants, that they were Jews living there and disappeared from Berlin because deported in Auschwitz. So this house wasn't reconstructed because the people living there didn't return to Berlin. The empty place becomes a spot of a monument. There are many other examples. Just a couple of things to conclude, to build the conclusion, because traces, war leaves traces that are scarce in the cities, that are not just material scarce, but also symbolic scarce. And symbolic scarce, if cultural traumas means something, I believe that there is also a collective dimension of traumas. There are collective traumas and cultural traumas. So somehow these scars that are hidden, healed somehow, sometimes can reappear, can be repressed, removed, sometimes can reappear. This is a very well-known case, so I'm not saying a lot because I'm sure that many of you already know. This is the reconstructed, the new old bridge in Mostar. Mostar was, as you know, one of the main victims of the Yugoslav URBICIDE. This was the bridge, the Mostar comes from most, that means the bridge was reconstructed. This is the former front line during the war that still today somehow, now less and less, but still somehow acts like an internal border inside the city, dividing two halves of the city, the Croat half and the Bosnian half. Now less than before, of course. But in a way, this place here brings some also hidden traces. Not some of them are very visible because there are a lot of ruins still, as you can see from this picture in this boulevard. But somehow there is in this point, in this boulevard that was the former front line, overlapping of different narratives. Now we have the pacifying narrative of UNESCO, in which that we see here in these murales, this graffiti that's near the boulevard, and in which what's narrated is this fairy tale of reconciliation between the two halves through the reconstruction of the bridge. Then we have the narrative of the war that reappears through some ruins that have been not reconstructed. We have monument in competition among each other, and we see what happens here. A Bosnian monument was dynamited because it was too close to this fringe zone, let's say, near the border, and immediately, let's say, the counter monument of the Croat side was damaged as well. This doesn't happen in the UNESCO zone where everything is pacified. What happens that this repressed memory comes on the surface again through a spontaneous monument, this small stone in English, don't forget. So this stone is not talking to the locals, it's talking to the tourists going there. Don't forget that we had war here. The restoration has kind of hidden these traces, but they are still here. So and there is other things that it would be too much now to talk other signs of this division, let's say. What can happen? I'm going just to the last part of the because I'm afraid that I spoke too much. So I want just to conclude on this, on the problem of the afterlife of these traces. The current conflict is a tragic conflict. It's also a conflict of memory. And since we know that somehow reconstruction and the post-URBICIDE phase is even more critical because there is no neutral preservation of memory, but a practice of manipulation of traces and then a rewriting of memory somehow every time. Destruction of the city sometimes can be used as a tool, as a ground for the next ideological rewriting of the city. That is something that I think it's very present today in the act of aggression of Ukrainian city by Russia. I mean, there is an implicit project of ideological rewriting already of the heritage of the city. Because of this war, the war is also a war about memory. We talked about it's a war about the uses of symbols, the political uses of the, in this case, for example, the great patriotic war in post-Soviet Russia, no? From after the Soviet era to Putin, there is a very interesting, many interesting changes of paradigms about how Second World War has been thematized, how this war is used today. We see the tanks using this flag, this political symbol that becomes a propaganda symbol today. And so you know that in Europe there is a strong debate about difficult heritage, about dissonant heritage. I don't know if it's the right moment to discuss this now, but I want just to put something at the table. This was, for example, in Italy, we have a very strong debate about the problem of our difficult heritage, about fascist heritage. Now, it's very interesting to see what's happening in Ukraine with the de-Sovietization laws and this war on memory also on the other side. So I think it's very interesting to address this afterlife of the traces that are not innocent. I mean, when we sometimes distinguish between a strategic level and then there is the symbolic level, is something that is it's just overimposed on the strategic. No, they are more entangled and intertwined than it seems. All these levels are way to wage war in different fields, in different battlefields. And I go to the conclusion with this very interesting example to see how memory is never innocent. This is a beautiful example, I think, in Kiev in the first days of the war, when an anti-tank barrier was from the Second World War was taken from the museum. I don't know if it is true. I want to ask you, to ask all of you if this is true. I saw this picture in the internet. Was taken from the museum and employed and used for according to its primary function. That for me, it's a very eloquent image because it shows this the fact that memory is always recombining and retranslating, and there isn't never an innocent passage of memory. So why am I talking now also post-URBICIDE while the let's say the current problem is URBICIDE in this moment? Because I think that it is also a matter of what we consider symbols that are not just symbols, but there is the worst thing are made under under kinds of symbols. So somehow I think that these questions should be addressed together, URBICIDE and post-URBICIDE. So I will stop here, and of course I'm sorry if I brought together many things in a very superficial way somehow, but my aim was just to put some topics on the table. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for extremely interesting introduction and introducing us to the topic. And now I just give the floor to Kostantyn, and he will proceed with his presentation and ideas on herbicide and perhaps post-herbicide, right?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, I'd like to present Kostantyn. He's the head of the Department of Human Geography at Kiev National University, Kiev National Shlipchenko University.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to join this very interesting for me personally, and I hope for audience series of discussions. And today we should start with URBICIDE, again about war and the city. There are a number of books and articles with war and cities in their titles, from Ashworth's War in the City from early 90s on mutual relationship of cities and defense against deliberate military threats, to war victims and the right to a city by Al-Shubaki, published this year on indirect urbicide through the lens of refugee camps. It seems that the main types of manifestation and consequences of war in the 21st century have been described. However, the Russian war in Ukraine opens a new page in deliberate destruction of cities. Different manifestations of killing the city are described in different terms and interpreted in different forms of urbicide. Place annihilation or extreme urbicide, urbicide under non-military construction wars from 60s, Rubbleisation from Afghan war, Soviet Union tactics in this war, identicide, cultural cannibalism, extreme domicide, murder of the city, architecture, spatiocide, fragmentation of urban space under asymmetric war, acts of or campaigns of terror in cities outside of warfare, and indirect urbicide. A long list of different kinds of manifestation of urbicide. And of course, great generalization and great explanation of urbicide by Martin Forward, and I am happy to see him here in audience. It's great, really. But as for me, the mentioned forms of urbicide is far from exhaustive. However, despite the variety of forms and concepts associated with urbicide, some common features can be identified. I mean, first, deliberate targeting of cities is non-selective, since it concerns all residents, not to any individual ethnic or social group, without distinction by social status or political preferences, as we see in many Ukrainian cases. The deliberate, not as collateral damage, destruction of symbolic places and buildings important for ethnic and national identity is combined with the destruction of mundane, ordinary spaces and buildings in which everyday practices of ordinary people are embedded. Thirdly, urbicide is characterized by the destruction of physical, tangible parts, as well as intangible features, both built environment and values of liberty, civility, diversity, coexistence, assault on the values of civilization. Fourth, urbicide is aimed at killing the heterogeneous urbanity for its own sake, the destruction of urban life that encourages the presence of others, and where diversity is deeply rooted in architecture and urban space. And fifth, deliberate, even carefully planned destruction of cities reconfigures urban spaces in unexpected ways. And also, I would like to emphasize a bit more on indirect urbicide, because usually when we talk about urbicide, we talk about direct urbicide, but indirect urbicide is also important. In Ukrainian case, for example, for occupied cities, it's really a huge problem, and not for now, more for post-urbicide world. Indirect urbicide, as Abuji emphasizes, can be realized by construction or by control. In terms of construction, either the construction of temporary housing and refugee camps in other than directly urbicide cities, or the construction of new other placeless building instead of symbolic or typical in destroyed cities. In terms of control, indirect urbicide can be realized via different kinds of city divisions, the internal separation, weakening bindings, installation of numerous checkpoints, and loss of access to certain parts of the city. Concerning urbicide in Ukraine, is it just another story in a long list of well-covered destroyed cities, or does it have new manifestation and needs to be reconsidered? As for me, it's really new story. It's really new side of urbicide. First of all, because of its scale, it's the largest ongoing war of the 21st century. This is not a recreation of one of the previous scenarios of urbicide, but a new, planned, but ineptly and outrageously implemented project. The radical destruction of Mariupol and Popasna, the wanton massacre in Bucha and Izum, the everyday destruction of Kharkiv and Mykolaiv are various manifestations of this direct urbicide. At the same time, non-military destruction of the occupied city are also an important part of urbicide results, consequences for Ukrainian cities. If you look on this map that shows urbicide in Ukraine at the first 100 days of the active phase of the war. War started, launched in 2014, but active phase from February 24, 2022. So you can see that 147 cities, or third of all cities in Ukraine, were directly and deliberately destroyed, not taking into account indirect urbicide. 27 cities were destroyed by shelling, bombing, or street fighting every 10 days. 7 cities at least every 4th day, and 4 cities at least every 2nd day. And this urbicide is continuous. Ukrainian cities are burning in online or in our screens and in our streets outside of our mind. How to explain this deliberate destruction of our city? There are a lot of explanations that would be used for this case. First of all, military necessary actions and all collateral damage. As for me, it's no explanation. According to the Security Service of Ukraine, only every 20th missile strike of the Russian Federation was directed at a military facility. The remaining 19 targeted houses, schools, hospitals, universities. So it's quietly can be understood as collateral damage or military necessary actions. Other explanation, the cultural cleansing and cultural cannibalism, and at symbolic buildings that are important for Ukrainian identity. Also, no, my answer. The targets of destruction most often become schools, hospitals, residential, and utility buildings, ordinary, everyday public spaces. You can see 2 pictures from 2014 and from nowadays in Slovyansk and Kharkiv, the same pictures, hospital and school that was destroyed, deliberately destroyed in Kharkiv and Slovyansk. As the explanation, targeting otherness, no or partly. If we look on this map that shows a share of people who identify Ukrainian as native language, unfortunately data from last Ukrainian census from 2001, but it's important to look a share of Ukrainian native language people and urbicide results. we can see some relation, some links, but not so essential. For example, in case of Mariupol, reject this explanation. Next explanation can be used as a metaphoric interpretation, which understands the destruction as a sign of concept at stake in the war, partly. First of all, concept of the Russian war promoted by Russian politicians and justifies the destruction of Ukrainian cities by the mythical protection of the Russian-speaking population. What we see in our cities, dwellers are killed during bombing and shelling, regardless of their ethnicity, language, or even geopolitical preferences. How to say, people who like Russian war are killed the same as who dislike it. The same for other preferences, who has nostalgia about Soviet Union and who see Ukrainian future in Europe, European Union, or NATO. The same are killed under this urbicide. Other concepts that can be used, the concept of the artificial creation of Ukraine as a state is the same as in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the destruction of cities as if testifies the collapse of the bridging of essentially different parts and natural separation of so-called Novorossiya. I will not stop on this explanation. O'Loughlin with co-authors and Kuzio shows that the Novorossiya project failed because it's a just myth used by Russian political technologies that has little basis in reality. And one more concept I would like to emphasize is just an idea to discuss. Interpretation is the intentional weakening of Ukrainian cities, in particular Kharkiv. It was very interesting. In before time, in 2009, 11, 12, it was an idea of creating a cross-border, trans-border agglomeration of Kharkiv-Belgorod. And very interesting, in this idea, it was discussed that some functions of Kharkiv should be moved to Belgorod, Russian Belgorod. For example, first of all, international airport, university functions, and Belgorod University was more funding in compared with Kharkiv University. And this project was was rejected. And in these terms, we can see such shelling of Kharkiv from Belgorod as a so-called revenge of the core of the most not realized cross-border agglomeration. But this is just one additional explanation or just additional idea how to understand this urbicide, such huge urbicide in Kharkiv. And next, maybe more conventional explanation of urbicide is the destruction of heterogeneity. This is the essence of urbanity. Ukrainian cities are really heterogeneous in various aspects in terms of geopolitical preferences, beliefs, native language of residents, and such coexisting was the norm for Ukrainian city and continue to be norm for us. And to destroy, to reject this heterogeneity, to bring Russian world, Russian tradition into our cities may be used as an explanation. And additionally to all the previous ideas, I would like to add targeting the actual development of cities, growing civic consciousness and public activism in Ukrainian cities. We conducted interviews in 2020, 2021, 2022. Last, our interview was conducted in early February, just a week before the active phase of the war, with IDPs in the eastern part Ukrainian cities, and with returnees to Kramatorsk after occupation. Some people escaped from occupation, and after that go back, and we also discussed with them. And part of interview was conducted with Kramatorsk, the city of Kramatorsk dwellers who stayed under occupation. And what we found, it's very important for me. First, improvement of public spaces and new construction after occupation. As are some of our respondent answers. And construction, and landscape, and roads are being repaired, and transport has become more modern. The square was restored. We didn't have cranes here for 20 years. Now something is constructed here. We started to build something new. It's amazing that it's not just shops, but houses for people, and so on, so on. The same, many same sentences. And also from this picture, you can see really cranes in Kramatorsk, firstly from 90s, and new boulevards, new avenues, new parks, new fountains. It's really absolutely other vision of the city. Increase in entrepreneurial activity. Many entrepreneurs came to us and opened businesses. So some jobs appeared. A lot of ideas, interesting startups were opened precisely thanks to the displaced person. They lived in a bigger and developed city, and they have already seen it. They have their own vision of how to make it better and bring it, these ideas, these approaches to Kramatorsk, for example, from Donetsk, occupied Donetsk. Next one, strengthening of civil society, local activism and community cohesion. As for people, more patriotic people have appeared. Consciously active people appeared more. Maybe there are more friendly people, more sociable people. And also very interesting, opposing vectors of change in the occupied city and neighboring liberated cities like Kramatorsk and occupied like Donetsk, Luhansk, Orlivka, and so on, from which IDPs we interviewed. Such examples of opposing vision, decline, destruction versus development, renewal. From one side, everything is broken, killed, shabby. Then it was a flourishing city, keeping up with time. At the moment, what was, and that is no longer. From other side, this, as Kramatorsk case, the city has started to be developed after the occupation. A lot has been done in the city. Construction has started. New projects are being implemented. The city lives its own life, develops. Other side, very interesting game of colors, grayness versus brightness. In case of Donetsk, grayness, no vivid impressions. In case of Kramatorsk, the picture has become brighter. Before that, it was somehow gray, somehow colorfully has become. Other opposition, there and then versus here and now. Donetsk 2014 and now are two completely opposite things. The city has stalled in development. Must see before and after. It has developed rapidly, like it fell off the mountain peak and were farther down or up, and time froze. In case of Kramatorsk, but 2014 Kramatorsk and 2022 Kramatorsk are two different cities of Kramatorsk. After 2014, it began to change for the better. It changed 100 times. It became more comfortable for life. And finally, Russian city with Soviet nostalgia versus Ukrainian city with an advanced vision of the future. In case of Donetsk and our similar cities under occupation became Russian. That is, when you go there, you understand that you are not in Ukraine. The ship has stopped, the helmsman left, and the ship sails on its own. What's left from the Ukrainian still floating? In case of Kramatorsk, now it's no longer a Soviet city. Thinking has changed. Ukraine has become more. We started to develop a free Ukraine here, not the Soviet Ukraine, but free Ukraine. And in this picture on the slideshow, for example, change in chain store names. In 2021, even 21, it was Arbat with close connotation with the Russian capital. And now it's with Ukrainian chain store Varus. It's changed on our eyes. We are witnesses. It's essential change in city urban space arrangement, in development, in breaking with Soviet nostalgia, and so on. And this can be seen as a course of such brutal urbicide, because occupied cities that should be facade of Russian world are really gray and semi-destroyed. But Ukrainian neighboring cities, liberated cities, shows development. And as one of such urbicides, of such destruction of cities, can be the just development of cities in Ukrainian control part. And in terms of indirect urbicide, we also should consider two sides, by construction and by control. By construction, when refugee or IDP camps was organized in many Ukrainian cities, for example, at this picture in Kharkiv, modular transit camps for IDPs really did not significantly affect Ukrainian cities or surrounding neighborhoods. Yes, it's true, most of them are organized on the periphery of cities. You see on the map of Kharkiv on the periphery. But the number of IDPs in such camps is really small, 1.2% of the total number in this, for example, city of Dnipro, 0.5% in Kramatorsk, 0.3% in Kharkiv, 0.2% in Slovyansk, 0.1% in Mariupol, and in other cities lower figures. And as our interviewees said, that IDPs are scattered in the city, smeared in a thin layer throughout the city. And one of experts on IDPs issues in Donetsk region comments the situation. In his opinion, it's very good that there is no such place in Kramatorsk where IDPs are more concentrated, because his fundamental position, and this is very important, IDPs should live in the city, among the citizens. They must socialize, adapt, integrate into the community and live in the community. There are the same residents of the city as everyone else. And this situation is really typical for most Ukrainian cities. So indirect urbicide in such way is not visible in Ukrainian city. But other side, by control, or like something as like control in cities under occupation, we can see. First of all, the residents' outflow, because there are no prospects there. Even those ardent ones who believed in those republics, they left in all directions. There remains retirees who had nowhere to go, or because of the dangers, fears, and uncertainty when people are afraid to go out into the streets. You don't understand what you have to do now, what awaits you. And as a result, our respondents talk about empty city, completely empty with desert streets, a dead city, and like this characteristics. Other side of indirect urbicide, planned and unconsciousness, destruction of the city's infrastructure, neglect of buildings, and at the same time, imitation, simulation of development. Everything was in a terrible state of destruction. Many houses suffered. The city is killed. Everything is closed. Everything is in the terrible state. It was dirty. Other aspect, fragmentation of the urban space as a result of the installation of so-called all these checkpoints on which there were incomprehensible personalities of incomprehensible appearance, inadequate faces with machine guns demanding something from you. Next one, ineffectiveness of city management due to unprofessionalism, often haphazardness in the selection of personnel or awareness of temporality, lack of effect of legal norms. And here, I am the law, special rules, and there, so to speak, not democratic ways. Law does not flourish there, and each city is controlled by its own gang. And finally, the lack of a strategy and real project for the city development. Donetsk and Lugansk, as it's interesting, not one, but many of our respondents say that are a suitcase without a handle, suitcases without a handle. And additionally, we can talk about non-return intentions of IDPs who left such cities, but it's as a story I would like to discuss about such non-return narratives, but maybe next time or another occasion. So, some conclusions. Urbicide in Ukraine is not just another story in a long list of well-covered destroyed cities. Mostly, urbicide in Ukraine targets the actual developments of cities, growing civic consciousness and public activity. With opposite orientation of the development of occupiers and neighboring liberated cities, causing the brutality of the deliberate destruction of more successful cities. And occupied cities are indirectly urbicided with depopulation, planned or conscious destruction of the infrastructure, fragmentation of the urban space, and ineffectiveness of city management. What we can look further about which prospects to overcome the consequences of urbicide are related to the search for effective post-war recovery strategies for both destroyed directly urbicide and very important temporarily occupied indirectly urbicide cities. These cities can expect a so-called window of opportunity by investment and flagship projects. But at the same time, they will have to solve the issue of difficult heritage or places of pain and shame. The study of urbicide should go hand in hand with the study of peace, the post-urbicide city, and I hope in the next discussion it will be covered as well. And taking into account questions that we found in registration forms, I add some additional slide. Sorry, maybe I use my time, but I add some slides, some comments. Some lessons of post-war urban reconstruction. We also discussed many cases of such post-urbicide reconstruction from Rotterdam to Sarajevo, from Warsaw to Hamburg, and many other cases. And as for me, the main important lessons: do not separate urban space and urban residents. The formula should be repopulation plus reconstruction, urban community plus urban fabric, destroyed damaged urban space plus traumatized local residents plus IDPs from other cities who remained. Second, to prevent corruption, alliances of global capital with local elites, you can see in many cases. A hidden politics of memory of the military aggressors, also a very important aspect of lessons from previous urbicide cases. To use creative potential to produce new approaches, not only to copy others, to make many replicas from previous ones. As for example, in case of Rotterdam, so-called pedestrian shopping street was emerged as a new phenomenon, as a part of reconstruction concept strategy. And maybe more painful question about memorialization of the urbicide consequence. How and who will interpret the war and the consequences of urbicide in the city to memorialize? We should break away from traditional memorials. No need to create new standardized monuments like the unknown soldier, rather counter monuments, anti-memorials, abstract memorials, and to prevent excessive touristification of the urbicide consequences that we now see in many Bucha and European, many so-called tourists visit the city to look on results of urbicide. It's not right way. Preservation of memory of the trauma. And finally, to restore the city as a home for the dwellers who have changed. And just some pictures of memorialization in Kramatorsk. For example, monument to the people's hero of Ukraine, football player tortured by pro-Russian militants in Bernatsky Gardening Park, really restored park in Kramatorsk. And landing combat vehicle as a monument in the old city, traditional approach. But at the same time, I'm sure you all know so-called Sarajevo roses in memory of bloody roses, stone roses, and Francesco also showed this picture. And in Kramatorsk, we also can see these pictures and some, how to say, movements with wallflowers in Kramatorsk. And temporary installation within the framework of the project Reconstruction of Monument in Sarajevo. We can also think in case of Kramatorsk, for example, this monument, how many more people must die in Kramatorsk with a glass cube that represents fragility of human lives, and rocket inside cube is a replica of rocket which hit Kramatorsk in the exact spot in 2015. And very interesting that when I was in Kramatorsk last time, it disappeared from the street. It was temporary. I asked where, locals explained that in other place, but it was really temporary but important, impressive memorialization of urbicide of the city. And finally, how to protect such urbicide in terms of cultural heritage. We can see many monuments in Kyiv, like at the left side picture of monument of famous Ukrainian poet Svitlana Shlipchenko that was protected. But how to protect, for example, social heritage from Soviet times, socialist famous house in project in Zaporizhia, just a day before it was destroyed. It's really heartbreaking for me to see such heritage. I don't know how to protect, just additional defense forces for Ukraine, just such way. Thank you very much for your attention and audience. We are open to discussion.
Thank you so much for your passionate presentation. And I think we can proceed to some questions, or you can just ask put questions to each other. We have. You tried
I
actually.
want to say thank you. I just want to say thank you a lot, Kostantyn, because I think that was really. I mean, we agree on many things, as you can notice, but in a way, it was important to hear your talk today. So thank you very much.
So perhaps you can proceed to the dialogue.
Maybe let's start our discussion. Francesco, you started, and at the end of your presentation, you talk about Mostar Bridge. Yes, it's really symbolic and iconic example of urbicide, but not just urbicide, and city divide as well. What do you think? What's the main lessons for nowadays urbicide in Ukraine from this case? This case from 90s, from other war that started as asymmetric war, when some maybe new kind of war, but typical for 90s. What are the main lessons for nowadays, for Ukrainian case? What do you think? Is it really important for us for now?
This is an important question. I studied a lot the Mostar case, and the Mostar case has been studied by many people. It's one of the example of reconstruction that has been under scrutiny for decades now. No? And in a way, this was an act of soft diplomacy as well. So it was a political act. So at the beginning, when I was there, when I did a short field work in Mostar, I remember everybody, there is this Bosnian and Herzegovinian sense of humor that's very nice. Everybody was saying the same thing. This bridge, it's good that we have the bridge again, but this bridge is fake. This bridge is pretending that nothing happened. So now this is, let's say, the most sold narrative, bottom-up narrative, let's say, in the literature. Everybody, this is recorded by everybody that went there to do a field work, because it's something that any people from any inhabitants from Mostar would say about this fakeness of the bridge. But at the end, what I think about this, I am happy that that bridge is there again, built in that way, because from under a technical point of view, that bridge, the reconstruction of the bridge is perfect. There is nothing you can say about that. But at the same time, the Mostar case shows you very vividly what are the risks of repressing memory and imposing a narrative, a forced narrative of reconciliation, while reconciliation didn't happen yet. Because it was an act of soft diplomacy from the international community that did nothing in the Yugoslav wars. The international community did nothing for during the Yugoslav. Didn't act as it had to act, maybe because there weren't the tools to do that. This will be too long to do that, to do this discussion now. But it was an act of soft diplomacy from the international community to impose this image of a pacified city, while the city wasn't pacified yet. So my opinion, but it is my opinion, and I know that I'm entering a mined field, and it's something that everything one say is wrong by definition, because it's really, but I think that in situation like this, it becomes crucial to collect as many voices as possible, to allow these voices to become vocal in the public space, while a mainstream narrative imposed on the urban space can generate side effects that are not nice, let's say. So this is my opinion, but I know that it can be contested as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your vision, for your answer. And one more question. You mentioned about drones and a new dimension of urbicide from drones, from air. And at the same time, we can talk about survival strategies. And in this terms, arise important question about shelters. For example, for Ukrainian cities, it's a really strange situation. For example, in Kyiv, we have many problems with shelters, how to survive on the background of such shelling of the city. And I mean, it means that usually we talk about urbicide as about surface process, how destroyed some buildings, some areas, some heritage object, and so on. What do you think? Is it important to talk and to study three-dimensional urbicide in air and in the underground? And in this case, what do you think? What is the main methodological approach? How to study? As for me, it's open question. I don't know right answer for this. How to study three-dimensional urbicide?
This is a great observation, actually. And the project I mentioned, the Eyal Weizman project, but also studies like Martin covered as well, but Stephen Graham, these three-dimensional features of urbicide has been already shown by this research, especially Eyal Weizman. I think that this kind of research is very promising for this field. Because my opinion, it's not just my opinion, I'm sure that Weizmann agrees as well, and probably also Martin, probably also Stephen Graham. Urbicide and war on the city has another side effect that makes the structure of the city visible. Through urbicide, through the lens of urbicide, we see the city, we see the real structure of the city. So we immediately see what's more important, what's less important, what's in Sarajevo that was clear, in Ukraine now it's clear in the city. What are the connections between different elements of the city? It's like a structural approach to the city. So we need, of course, an approach that gives us the fact that a city is not just a surface space. It's a space that it's not even just three-dimensional. It's more than three-dimensional, because there is also another dimension that I would like to, probably it will sound banal, but there is time also. There is time. And URBICIDE showed you also the evolution. This example that I showed at the beginning, the Kiev, the tower, Tibu Tower bombing, and the fact that this topography of the city is composed by different layers of memory that interact among each other, and somehow that bombing made that visible again. So there is this counter effect that's interesting, I think. So yeah, I completely agree, and I'm happy also that there were many points of connection, I think, in our talks. First of all, I suspected that you could give me an answer. I asked during my talk, is the Ukrainian URBICIDE just another URBICIDE? You showed very well that it's not just another URBICIDE, and you showed. I enjoyed a lot your idea that it's a sort of patronizing URBICIDE. No, there is it's a way to control and to make cities that are growing, to make them less, I don't know how to say, less independent, less. So there is this strategy. This is why these symbolic and infrastructural, structural and superstructural levels are very interconnected. And I liked a lot the fact that you showed some minimal and very small elements of changes, because these everyday aesthetics of the city, how in occupied city these aesthetics change. And I think that a lot happens there. When a sign is changed, when I don't know, a corner, there is another dominant color instead of another color. There is a lot of colonization and post-urbicidal colonization, more than a reconstruction somehow, sometime. So I appreciated a lot this attention for this detail of the everyday aesthetics. So thanks really for this, also for giving us this let's say witnessing about something that it's important for us to know firsthand from you. So thank you much.
Thanks, and sorry for my long list of questions, but maybe we just one more that really.
No, it is great. We just intended you both to have a conversation. It was conceived as in the form of a dialogue. So,
I heard from one prominent scholar in urban geopolitics that Ukrainian should not study urbicide in Ukraine because in this case, we will have some bias in understanding and explaining the situation. What do you think? Is it right if we Ukrainians study urbicide? Or in every times we will think through our lens, through our vision of our Ukrainian identity, our Ukrainian background and
I don't know.
patriotism.
I don't know who said that. I completely disagree. Yeah, this is this has been for a long time debated also in anthropology. There is always an emic and ethic point of view. We can assume the point of view of the people living inside the community or a point of view external to the community. And recent ethnography, recent anthropology agrees on the fact that we are always biased at this anyway. The problem is how we make visible our bias in case. So declaring the position of the observer, I think is, but for example, in this case, I mean, it's very important that, for example, the research you are doing is very important. So I don't know really who said that. I can understand, but I don't agree. I can understand what he's talking about, but I totally don't agree. So instead, I wanted to ask you something about this idea of two ideas, actually. I appreciated a lot the idea of indirect herbicide. That's really interesting. But before that, I would like to ask you something about the problem of difficult heritage. That's something that I didn't know. I wasn't sure to mention that problem, but I'm very happy. It looks like we talked a lot about before this conversation, and we tried to merge, but like spontaneously, there are many things, many connecting points. The problem of difficult heritage is very, very interesting, because I would like to ask you your opinion about this. You said at a certain point that somehow Ukrainian society has to take in account this difficult heritage, to do something with this difficult heritage. What kind of work do you think it's more suitable for difficult heritage? And I give you just one example, the concept of difficult heritage, McDonald's, the case in Germany, in Italy, fascist heritage has been kind of ignored for decades. The day after the fall of fascist regime, spontaneously many, let's say, more evident symbols of fascism were just taken away. But then architecture, monuments, they silently remained in the city. And they kind of converted from monument to document. So what do you think will be the best fate for this difficult heritage in Ukraine? To just remove, destroy that, or kind of to reframe that? To give a new semantic frame, to explain what that, let's say, this terrible, let's say, heavy legacy, how this could be used also to unmake and deconstruct some ideologies, so this is something that really interested to hear your opinion.
Thank you very much for your really important question for us, question of difficult heritage, because especially under war, we should see the first way to destroy all memories about our enemy. It's right way for nowadays. But looking forward, we should think about cities with a long history, with different identities, because city not just about one identity, it's about heterogeneous cities, about difficult approach to city planning in previous period and so on. Therefore, I prefer to think more looking forward, and in this case, some of monuments should be removed from city, from urban space, from public spaces to special places, as in many cities it was done in Central Europe, for example. Some parts of occupation, some part of Soviet legacy, socialist legacy, communist legacy, and so on. Of course, it was discussion about, for example, monument to shores in Kiev's urban space, and there are many defenders of this monument. Yeah, it was just walled and closed for seeing, but saved. Now it was next wave of discussion about this monument. Should it be destroyed, demolished, or preserved at the same place? My vision, it should be removed from urban space, but to another place. More important question about heritage related to socialist time housing blocks, for example. Many of them related with Soviet and Russian architects, with Soviet and Russian vision of how a city should be planned and so on. For example, Sotsgorod, socialist city, Sotsmisto. In many Ukrainian cities, we can find such areas. And of course, as for me, as a phenomenon, urban phenomenon, it should be preserved, but with new representation of it, with explanation, as in case of Berlin Wall. You can go on near this line and with some explanation, some plates with text and so on. As for me, maybe such way we should work with difficult heritage. And other aspect, it's important who will be responsible for last decision, what should be done with it. And it's also, it should be with facilitation of some Ukrainian famous people who will not be under question, is it right or bad way to do with this or other places. Such, maybe such my answer will be.
Thank you. I have actually another question for you, but before posing this question, I know that Martin has to go away. Before he goes away, I want to see if Martin Cover want to, because I'm happy that you're here among the audience. If you want to say something, maybe.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry. I have to go and pick up my kids. I found this really fascinating, and I think both great presentations, and I'm really looking forward to kind of talking more. Kostantyn, I thought the interview material is really fascinating, and I really think your explanation around the destruction of civic development and civic consciousness, I think that's a really that's a really fascinating way to kind of take the concept further and to say that there's something specific. It's not just a general case, but there's something specific about urbicide. So that was really fascinating. I wanted to ask you a question, and it might seem like a kind of technical question, but I'd be interested to know, because I think it's something that's been on my mind. So in other places like Afghanistan or Chechnya, Russian forces have been accused of what's been called in Western writing Rubbleisation, right? And this has been seen as a kind of semi-coherent actual kind of military tactic. But there have been many ways to explain it particularly in terms of the clearing of urban space, right? That in some way, urban space is a kind of complicated terrain. And I noticed both of you talking about sort of three-dimensional aspect of urbicide that Steve Graham brings in. And Rubbleisation has often been seen as a kind of way of clearing out space. But other people have spoken about it in terms of, for example, genocide or ethnic nationalism, the destruction of heterogeneity, and so on. But I wondered whether, because in your account of urbicide, what I think you really bring out is that it's a kind of punitive, it's a punishment in many respects. You destroy kind of urban consciousness, urban development, civic consciousness as a sort of punitive strategy, which I think is right, and I think I probably really agree with that. But I wanted to ask to what extent you think that Rubbleisation, because you didn't really cover it in your presentation, to what extent do you think you see Rubbleisation in the case of Ukraine?
Thank you very much for your comments and for your question. I think about this question of Rubbleisation as in Afghan war or special site as in case of Grozny in Chechen war, and the same situation was at the first stage of the war with Russia or Russian war in Ukraine in 2014. In case, for example, of Donetsk airport and neighboring area, it was really destroyed to rebel, just to clear the space for this. The same situation we can see in some frontline cities. For example, Volnovakha or Popasna, this small city, without any, as for me, punishment for citizens, just as a Rubbleisation strategy. But in other case, for example, of Kharkiv, case of Mykolaiv, it's other story, as for me. It's not just destroy city for clearing space. It's another explanation I have no, because why? Because in previous time, as our survey showed, that there are many supporters of Russian world in the cities were, but not now. It's a change vision of developers essentially. It's rather other results than they can make. Therefore, it's really foolish step but really they continue it, unfortunately. Now Zaporizhia, last days, it's really at Kryvyi Rih. I see in audience also representatives of these cities. They can confirm this situation, because no other explanation. But of course, there are many different cases. If we look inside of Ukrainian city, in the same city, for example, northern, a bit other story, because they was destroyed in military purposes as well. But in general, this is how to say punishment for other geopolitical preferences, maybe such way. And also we have very interesting pre-war surveys from Kharkiv, from Dnipro, and from Mariupol, with 1,200 respondents in every city, and we asked, for example, about how they feel Soviet or not so pro-Ukrainian, and for example, a question about if it will be Russian military forces in your city. Will you defend your city with gun, or will you defend indirectly, for example, with bad work, with some destroying and so on? And for example, in Kharkiv was the lowest share of citizens who say yes, we will defend. Unfortunately, in Mariupol a bit higher, and the highest one in Dnipro. But after this URBICIDE, I think situation will change essentially, and I hope we will conduct a survey afterward, and we will think what's happened afterwards.
It would be really fascinating to see how those interview questions will change. I mean, I think in one sense it links very much to kind of Francesco's point about herbicide being a communicative strategy, right? That it's punitive, but it also can have kind of communicative effects on the people subject to it, right? And it would be very interesting to see how those interviews will change, definitely. I'm sorry, I have to.
Thank you very much, Martin.
No, I look forward to seeing it. Hopefully, I'll see you again in future sessions.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I think we now have space for only one question from the audience, because we are already we are overdoing our discussion. So if somebody has, because our speakers have addressed to me, our speakers have already addressed the questions that were put in advance in different ways, and perhaps we can, once we will be proceeding, we will go deeper into certain aspects of the questions you already put. So do anybody want now to put a question, final question, to put a final touch on our today's discussion? So if we don't have questions today, so I would like also again to thank our wonderful speakers for their wonderful presentations, and to all of you who made it in a Friday night and I hope to see you and your interest growing during our series of discussion. So till the next one, and we will keep you posted about our further developments of our series. So thank you so much, and goodbye for today.
Thanks a lot. Goran, show your face. I see you are among the audience. Open your webcam.
Perhaps we could start next time. We could start and ask people just to show up, and then you can put this flag. Hi, Goran.
Thank you very much. It was great.
It was really interesting. So yeah, it was really very, very. I think it was. Okay, then.
Yeah, thank you
Goodbye
very
and-
much for discussion on Urbicide, and I hope also to join discussion on post-Urbicide. And as in one question from audience was about, should we talk about war in post-war cities? Yes, sure.
Yeah, we have
I
to.
hope we will
And
discuss
actually,
this
it will
question
be the topic
next
of
time.
one of our next discussions, right?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to
Thank
all of
you.
you.
Thank
In
you.
particular to
Have a nice
Kostantyn.
weekend. Nice weekend to everybody.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Nice
Ciao.
and safe weekend.
Nice
Yes,
and
exactly. Bye. Ciao.
Bye.
bye.